The challenge begins. The warlord stood at the edge of the battlefield, his dark armor shining under the alien sky. His long cloak swayed in the wind, and his glowing red eyes stared at the human standing before him. The planet Earth had fallen silent. His fleet hovered above the cities, casting massive shadows over the land. Millions of humans had already surrendered, their weak weapons useless against his mighty empire. Yet this one human, this one strange creature, refused to show fear. The warlord's lips curled into a smirk. He had conquered hundreds of worlds, broken the strongest warriors, and forced kings and emperors to kneel. Every species in the galaxy trembled at the sight of him. But now he faced something he had never encountered before, a human who did not fear him. "Do you know who I am?" The warlord's voice echoed across the ruins. The human, dressed in a simple black jacket, crossed his arms and smiled. "You're just another alien trying to act scary." The warlord's smirk disappeared. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He clenched his fists, his claws twitching. "You mock me? My monster awaits my command. With a single word, I can unleash a nightmare upon your world." The human shrugged. "Then do it." For the first time in centuries, the warlord hesitated. He had expected the human to beg for mercy, to tremble, to scream. But instead, this human looked bored. The warlord's monstrous beast growled behind him. It was a creature of destruction, a weapon that had devoured planets. Its eyes glowed with hunger, its massive jaws dripping with venom. It had torn through entire armies, reducing civilizations to dust. The warlord had unleashed it before, and he had always enjoyed watching his enemies break before it. But now, standing before this single human, the warlord felt something strange. Doubt. The human yawned. "Well, are you gonna do something, or are we just standing here all day?" The warlord's grip on his weapon tightened. He had never felt insulted like this before. "Why don't you fear me?" he demanded. His voice carried the weight of 1,000 conquests, but the human still did not flinch. The human tilted his head. "Because your monster is nothing compared to what we faced before." The warlord frowned. "Lies. No species has ever defeated my beast." The human smirked. "You think we haven't seen monsters before. You think your little pet scares us." He took a step forward. The warlord, without meaning to, took a step back. The human chuckled. "Let me tell you something. Fear is a funny thing. It controls weak minds. But humans, we don't let fear stop us." He pointed at the warlord's beast. "That thing. It might look scary to you, but to us, it's just another problem to solve." The warlord's heart pounded. He had seen brave warriors before, but this was different. This wasn't arrogance. It wasn't madness. It was certainty. This human truly believed that his monster was not a threat. The human's voice dropped lower. "You've never fought humans before, have you?" The warlord narrowed his eyes. "I have fought countless species." The human grinned. "Yeah, but we're different. We don't break. We adapt. We learn. We don't just survive. We win." The warlord's beast growled louder. It could feel the tension, the strange energy coming from this human. It was hungry, eager to attack. The warlord could give the command at any moment. But something inside him whispered a warning. Something told him that this fight was not going to be like the others. The human took another step forward. His eyes gleamed with something the warlord could not understand. Was it madness? Was it confidence? Or was it something far more dangerous? The warlord felt a strange sensation in his chest, a feeling he had never known before. Was this fear? He shook his head, pushing the thought away. No, he was a conqueror, a ruler of worlds. He would not be afraid of a single weak human. He raised his hand. "Enough talk," he growled. His monstrous beast roared, shaking the ground. The warlord's warriors cheered, ready for destruction. The human didn't move, didn't blink, didn't flinch. Instead, he smirked. And for the first time in his life, the warlord felt doubt creeping into his mind. The command was on his lips. But for some reason, he didn't speak it. The monster unleashed. The warlord stood still, his glowing eyes locked onto the human. The air between them felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. His warriors watched, their armored bodies ready for battle, their weapons humming with energy. The warlord knew what they were thinking. Why was he hesitating? He clenched his fist. Enough. With a swift motion, he raised his hand and gave the command. Devour. A deep, bone-rattling roar shook the battlefield as the beast surged forward. It was massive, its body covered in thick, armored scales that shimmered like obsidian. Its long, coiling limbs slammed into the ground, crushing metal and stone beneath its weight. Its jagged mouth split wide, rows of needle-sharp teeth dripping with acidic venom. The air filled with the stench of decay, the scent of 1,000 civilizations it had already consumed. The warriors surrounding the warlord stepped back instinctively. Even they feared the beast, despite serving under it for generations. It had no mercy, no soul, only an endless hunger. Yet the human did not move. The warlord narrowed his eyes. Why does he still stand there? Why is he not running? The ground beneath the human cracked as the beast's monstrous limbs slammed closer. Its glowing red eyes focused on its prey. It lunged, jaws snapping forward with terrifying speed. The warlord expected screams. He expected blood. He expected the satisfying sound of bones being crushed. Instead, the human dodged. Not clumsily, not in panic, effortlessly. The warlord's breath caught in his throat. The beast's jaws slammed shut inches from the human's head, but he had already moved, his body shifting smoothly like he had seen this attack before. The warlord's warriors gasped. The human stood a few feet away now, hands still in his pockets, a small smirk on his lips. That all you got? The warlord's grip on his weapon tightened. Impossible. The beast roared in frustration, its enormous tail whipping toward the human. The sheer force of it had destroyed battleships before, had crushed armored tanks into dust. The human had no armor, no shield. He should have been reduced to nothing. But once again, he moved too fast. The tail slammed into the earth, shaking the battlefield like an earthquake. Dust and debris filled the air. The warlord squinted, his eyes searching through the smoke. And then, through the swirling dust, the human's voice rang out. I was hoping for a challenge. The dust cleared, and there he was, standing atop the beast's tail. The warlord's mind reeled. How? The human crouched, studying the beast's armored scales beneath his feet. He tapped the surface with his fingers. Tough skin, good defense. But his voice trailed off as he looked up at the warlord. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. You made a mistake. The warlord bared his fangs. You are nothing but an insect. The beast howled in rage, twisting its massive body to shake the human off. The warlord expected him to fall, to lose his balance, to finally show weakness. But instead, the human leaped. Not backward, not away. Forward, straight toward the beast's head. The warlord felt something he had never felt before, a sliver of fear. The human wasn't afraid at all. He was attacking. The beast reared back, opening its massive mouth, its rows of deadly fangs gleaming with poison. It lunged to swallow him whole. The human twisted midair and landed inside the beast's open jaws. The warlord's heart pounded. It's over. The human was inside the monster's mouth. Crushed, gone, consumed. A hush fell over the battlefield. The warlord exhaled slowly, finally, and then a sound echoed from inside the beast's throat. A chuckle. The warlord's breath caught. His warriors took a step back, their hands tightening on their weapons. The chuckle grew louder. A moment later, the impossible happened. A deafening explosion erupted from inside the beast's mouth. The monster's head snapped back, its enormous body convulsing. It roared, not in hunger, not in fury, but in pain. The warlord's eyes widened. No. The beast's jaws ripped open from within, and out stepped the human. Smoke drifted from his fists. His jacket was torn, but his grin was still there. His eyes burned with something even the warlord could not understand. The human had torn through the beast's mouth from the inside. "You really thought that would work?" he asked, shaking dust from his sleeves. The warlord could not speak. The battlefield had gone silent. His warriors, his best fighters, stared in horror at the scene before them. Their unstoppable monster was staggering, its jaws dripping with dark blood. It let out a deep, agonized snarl. For the first time, it was the one trying to back away. The human cracked his knuckles. "Now, my turn." And for the first time in his existence, the warlord felt true, bone-deep fear. Humanity's dark secret. The battlefield was silent. The warlord stood frozen, his mind unable to process what had just happened. His monster, the devourer of worlds, the unstoppable weapon of his empire, was bleeding, wounded, and the human, this simple, fragile creature, had torn his way out of its jaws. It was impossible. Yet the evidence was right in front of him. The warlord's warriors stood in stunned silence. Even they, trained for war, bred for conquest, had never seen anything like this. The air was thick with disbelief, with something that had never existed in his army before. Fear. The human, standing in front of the massive beast, wiped a trickle of blood from his cheek. He wasn't unscathed. The monster's fangs had grazed him. His jacket was torn, and his breathing was heavy. But his smirk remained. "You're lucky I went easy on it," he said, cracking his neck. "Otherwise, I would have torn its head clean off." The warlord felt his claws tighten into fists. Who was this human? "You?" The warlord took a step forward, his deep voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you?" The human's smirk widened. His eyes, those strange, fearless eyes, locked onto the warlord. "You really don't know, do you?" he said. "You came here thinking you were invincible, that your pet would tear through us like it always does." The human took a slow step forward, his boots crunching against the cracked earth. "But you never bothered to ask," he continued. "Never stopped to wonder how we survived before you got here, how we lasted this long in a universe full of monsters." The warlord narrowed his eyes. "Survival means nothing. You are a primitive race." "Primitive?" The human chuckled. "You keep telling yourself that." Another step forward. The warlord's beast snarled, trying to shake off the pain, but something was different. The way it shifted, the way it hesitated. It was afraid. The warlord had commanded it in battle for centuries. It had destroyed fleets, torn through planets, crushed entire civilizations. It had never feared anything. And yet now, it was slowly backing away from one man. The human noticed it too. He glanced at the beast, then back at the warlord. His grin turned sharper. "Looks like your monster knows," he said. "It can smell it, can't it?" "Smell what?" The warlord growled, stepping forward. His claws flexed. The human's eyes gleamed. "The truth." The warlord's gaze flickered between the human and his beast. The monster let out a low, uneasy growl, its massive claws digging into the ground. It wasn't just hurt, it was terrified. "You think you've conquered worlds," the human continued. "You think you've faced the worst the universe has to offer." He let out a short laugh. "Let me guess, every species you've ever fought either surrendered or died. None of them ever really fought back, did they?" The warlord's jaw tightened. "They resisted. They died," the human interrupted. "That's not fighting back. That's losing." The warlord's fingers twitched. "You don't get it, do you?" the human said, voice lowering. "You've only fought prey. Species that ran. Species that begged. species that couldn't match you. The warlord straightened. And neither can you. Humanity is. Humanity is different. The words cut through the air like a blade. For the first time, the warlord felt something unfamiliar creeping into his mind. Something cold. Something dangerous. You came to Earth thinking, we were just another weak race to conquer, the human said, his voice quiet but filled with something heavy. That we'd fall like the others. That we'd beg for mercy. He stepped closer, and the warlord's instincts screamed at him to step back. You think we fear monsters, the human said, tilting his head. You think we fear you. A slow, unsettling smile crossed his lips. We don't fear monsters. We create them. The warlord's blood ran cold. Something moved. A vibration in the ground, deep and distant. A shift in the air, like the universe itself had noticed what was happening. The human exhaled, lifting his gaze toward the sky. And you woke up the wrong one. The warlord frowned. What is he talking about? Then, a signal. Faint, but unmistakable. A pulse that rippled through the atmosphere. The warlord's warriors straightened, their armor clicking as they instinctively reached for their weapons. The warlord's fleet sensors began flashing in warning. His second-in-command, standing at the edge of the battlefield, suddenly froze. My lord, his voice wavered. We have movement. The warlord turned sharply. What do you mean? The warrior swallowed. Something is rising. The warlord's fingers clenched. He turned his gaze toward the distant mountains, toward the source of the signal. The clouds had begun to swirl. The sky, once filled with his ships, now felt different. And then it happened. The ground split. A low, unnatural growl rumbled through the earth. Something ancient. Something old. The warlord's beast whimpered. A shadow moved beneath the surface, a shape, colossal, shifting beneath the planet itself. The very air seemed to vibrate with its presence. The warlord's eyes widened. No. And then, from deep below the surface, a voice rose. Who dares wake me? The warlord took a step back. The human grinned. Like I said, he whispered. You woke up the wrong one. The hidden weapon. The warlord stood frozen, his crimson eyes locked onto the shaking earth beneath him. The battlefield had fallen into an unnatural silence. His elite warriors, his trained hunters of the void, the very same beings who had crushed countless civilizations, they were shaking. The warlord's monstrous beast, a terror that had devoured worlds, whimpered. And then, from the deep, something answered. Who dares wake me? The voice was not human. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting, lurking beneath the surface of this world, unseen and forgotten. Until now. The human stood still, watching the warlord with that same maddening smirk. His posture was relaxed, his expression almost amused, as if this was all just a game to him. You feel that, don't you? The human said, tilting his head. That little chill crawling up your spine. The warlord's claws twitched. He refused to acknowledge the truth. He refused to accept that he was afraid. His fleet's sensors screamed in warning. The sky above was no longer his. The swirling clouds had darkened, twisting unnaturally, as if something beyond this world had reached out and touched them. His second-in-command staggered toward him. My lord, we need to retreat. The warlord snarled. We do not retreat. The warrior's breath hitched, but he did not lower his gaze. This is not an army, he whispered. This is something else. We do not know what this is. The warlord turned back to the human. The human was grinning. You never stopped to think, did you? He said, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Never wondered how we survived. The warlord growled. You survived because you were insignificant. A planet of insects, not worth extermination. Until now. The human laughed. It was not forced, not desperate. It was genuine, like he knew something the warlord didn't. Yeah. The human exhaled. You sure about that? The warlord's patience snapped. Enough, he roared. I will finish this myself. He raised his arm, his armor glowing as power surged through him. His fleet's cannons charged, locking onto the human's position. His warriors readied their weapons. His beast, though trembling, snarled once more. This was it, the moment the warlord would crush this arrogant creature and erase his existence. Then the earth cracked open. A deep guttural sound, not a growl, not a roar, but something older, something wrong, echoed from the abyss. The warlord took a step back. That was a mistake, because in that moment, the human smile turned into something far worse. Triumph. Too late, the human whispered. The ground exploded. A massive shape erupted from below, sending a shockwave that ripped through the battlefield. The warlord's warriors were thrown back, their armor cracking against the impact. The warlord himself staggered, raising his arm to block the storm of dust and debris. When it cleared, he saw it, and he understood. It was not a machine. It was not a weapon. It was something alive. The creature that had risen from the depths towered over the battlefield, its form barely comprehensible, its blackened skin pulsed with unnatural energy. It had no eyes, yet the warlord could feel it staring into his soul. Its form shifted, like a nightmare struggling to stay in reality, as if the very laws of existence had to bend around it. This was not something humans built. This was something they had locked away. And now, it was awake. The warlord could not speak. The human did not look away. Meet him, the human said, gesturing toward the towering horror behind him. We call him Titan 001. Not very creative, I know. But hey, naming things isn't our priority. Survival is. The warlord forced himself to breathe. This thing, it belongs to you. The human tilted his head. Not exactly. He turned to glance up at the creature. We didn't create it. We just found it. The warlord's mind raced. This was not possible. How could a species as young as humanity have hidden something like this? How could they have something like this? Titan 001 took its first step forward. The ground shook violently, causing fractures to ripple across the battlefield. The warlord's beast whimpered, lowering itself in submission. It was terrified. The human sighed. You really shouldn't have come here. The warlord's breath came sharp. He refused to accept defeat. He refused to accept that this was the end. No, he would destroy this creature. He raised his communicator, barking an order. All ships, fire at will. The sky lit up. From the fleet above, thousands of energy blasts, missiles, and orbital cannons rained down on Titan 001. The warlord's warriors joined in, firing every weapon they had. The battlefield was consumed in fire and light. For a moment, the warlord felt control returning. For a moment, he thought he had won. Then the smoke cleared. Titan 001 stood untouched. The warlord's heart stopped. The human exhaled, shaking his head. Yeah, that was dumb. Titan 001 moved. It raised an impossible limb, more like a shape, shifting, changing, rewriting the very rules of physics, and swung it. The warlord's entire fleet was torn apart in a single motion. Ships crumpled like paper. The sky was filled with the wreckage of an entire armada, twisted metal and burning debris falling like stars. The warlord could not comprehend it. His empire's strongest fleet, erased in seconds. He stumbled, his mind shattering at the realization. He had made a mistake. A terrible mistake. The human watched him, his smile fading. You see, he said, voice quiet. We don't fear monsters. He turned, glancing at Titan 001 as it stared down at them all. We keep them locked away. The warlord fell to his knees. He had lost. And he finally understood why humans never feared him. Because they had far worse things to fear. Titans clash. The warlord had seen destruction before. He had caused it. He had watched entire civilizations crumble under his command, their planets reduced to nothing but ashes floating in the void. He had led wars that spanned across galaxies, stood victorious over empires that once claimed to be invincible. He had unleashed his monstrous beast, the devourer of worlds, upon thousands of species. None had survived. Until now. Until this. He was on his knees. His fleet gone. The sky, once filled with his warships, was now a graveyard of burning metal, shattered vessels falling like dying embers. His warriors, the strongest of his kind, lay scattered, broken, trembling in fear. His beast, his ultimate weapon, the horror that had turned entire planets into nothing, now lay whimpering, crawling backward from the thing that had risen from beneath the earth. Titan 001. The warlord didn't understand what he was looking at. It was a shape, shifting and twisting, defying logic. It had no true form. At times, it looked like a creature, a nightmare wrapped in shadows, its body pulsing with something ancient. Other times, it looked like a storm, an endless void that threatened to consume reality itself. The air around it warped, as if space and time themselves refused to acknowledge its presence. It was not a weapon. It was not a creature. It was something else, something not meant to exist. And it had awakened. The warlord forced himself to move. He gritted his fangs, pushing against the sheer weight of the moment, the crushing realization that he had made a mistake. He staggered to his feet, his claws curling into fists. He would not accept this. He was a conqueror. He was a god among mortals. He would not kneel to anyone. The human watched him, standing relaxed with that same smirk that made the warlord's blood boil. "You still think you have a chance, huh?" the human asked, tilting his head. "You really don't get it." The warlord growled, his voice sharp as a blade. "I will not be defeated. Not by you. Not by this thing." The human sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, you aliens are all the same. You come to Earth thinking you're the biggest, baddest thing in the galaxy, and every single time," he pointed toward Titan 001, "you learn the hard way." The warlord roared. "Kill it," he bellowed, his voice shaking the battlefield. His remaining warriors, though terrified, obeyed. They fired everything they had, high-energy plasma rifles, antimatter cannons, weapons capable of turning moons into dust. The sky exploded with light. For a moment, the battlefield became a second sun, blinding and filled with fire. The warlord gritted his teeth, watching as the full might of his army was unleashed in one final desperate attack. When the light faded, Titan 001 was untouched. The warlord's breath hitched. No, the thing turned toward him. And then, it moved, faster than something its size should have been capable of. Titan 001 lunged. The ground collapsed beneath it. Entire sections of the battlefield pulled into the abyss of its wake. Its form shifted, stretching and twisting, shadows coiling into something terrifyingly real. It reached for the warlord's beast, the monster that had destroyed thousands of civilizations. The monster that had once made the warlord feel invincible. It screamed. For the first time in its existence, the warlord's beast cried out in pure terror. It tried to run. It didn't matter. Titan 001's form expanded, swallowing the battlefield in darkness. It wrapped around the warlord's beast, consuming it in an instant. The beast struggled, claws lashing out, its massive tail whipping violently. It tried to fight. It tried to escape. It failed. The warlord watched, frozen, as his monster, his ultimate weapon, was ripped apart. Not just physically. Something worse. Titan 001 was not just killing it. It was erasing it. Piece by piece, the warlord's beast vanished, its body pulled into Titan 001's form, its very existence unraveling. And then it was gone. Silence. The warlord could not breathe. His warriors, What few remained stared in horror. Titan 001 turned toward him. The warlord took a step back. His mind screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere left to go. He had lost. The human finally broke the silence. "See, told you." He exhaled, hands in his pockets. "Not the first time we've had to deal with something like this." The warlord couldn't comprehend it. You control that thing," he whispered. His voice sounded small, weak. The human turned, looking up at Titan 001. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Concern? Fear? "No," the human admitted. "Not really." The warlord's stomach dropped. Titan 001's form twisted, the air around it humming with something unnatural. The human exhaled. "We don't control it." He turned back to the warlord. "We just keep it asleep." The warlord's heart pounded. "And you?" The human took a step forward. "Just woke it up." The warlord's body refused to move. This was not a battle anymore. This was a nightmare. Titan 001 shifted again, its shadow stretching, reaching toward the sky. The air shook, and suddenly the warlord's entire empire felt very, very small. The human watched him carefully. "You have two options," he said. "Run or pray." Titan 001 growled. The warlord chose to run. He barked an order into his communicator. "All remaining forces, retreat. Retreat now." His warriors did not hesitate. They abandoned their weapons, fleeing toward the remains of their ships, anything that could take them away from this cursed planet. The warlord followed. His pride was dead. His army was broken. And as he fled into the void, as his remaining ships burned through the atmosphere, leaving Earth behind, the human stood, watching him go. And behind him, Titan 001 stared up at the stars, as if it was waiting for something else, something worse. The warlord's decision. The warlord sat in silence. He was inside his flagship, one of the last remaining vessels of his once mighty fleet. The command deck, once alive with the chatter of warriors, now felt empty. His officers stood at a distance, afraid to speak. The usual hum of engines and machinery was drowned by an oppressive weight, a silence that felt like a funeral for his pride. His ship drifted just outside the blue sphere that was Earth. He could still see the battlefield, the ruins of his empire's fleet, the scars left by the thing they had woken up. Titan 001. The warlord's claws dug into the arms of his throne-like seat. His fangs clenched together so tightly that they might shatter. This was not just defeat. This was annihilation. His beast, the devourer of civilizations, was gone. His ships, the pride of his empire, had been erased like mere insects. His warriors had fled, not out of strategic retreat, but out of pure terror. And worst of all, the human was still standing. The warlord's second in command, bruised and exhausted, hesitated before stepping forward. "My lord, what are your orders?" The warlord didn't answer. Orders? What orders? They had already lost. His empire's greatest forces had crumbled before a single human and the monster buried beneath their world. This was not war. This was a warning. The warlord finally spoke, his voice low, but sharp as a blade. "We returned home." A collective exhale came from the officers on deck. Some of them had feared he might order a suicidal counterattack, but they knew, even the warlord himself knew, there was no victory here. "All surviving ships, prepare for warp travel," he ordered. His warriors rushed to obey, eager to escape. The warlord's eyes remained fixed on Earth. He had spent centuries believing he was the strongest force in the galaxy. He had never known fear. He had never encountered an enemy he could not break. But now he realized something that sent a deep chill into his very soul. Humanity was not just another species. They were something else, something that should have never been allowed to exist. And worst of all, they were not afraid of what they had buried. They should have been. But they weren't. They had locked away a nightmare, not because they feared it, but because they simply saw it as another problem to deal with. The warlord could barely comprehend it. Any other species in the universe would have been wiped out if they had faced Titan-001. Any other species would have been hunted to extinction by something like that. But the humans, they had kept it as a secret, a pet, and now it was awake. The warlord's grip on his seat tightened. That was not balance. That was not nature. That was madness. And if humanity had one of these creatures, did they have more? The thought sent a violent shiver down his spine. He turned to his officer. "Do we still have a listening drone near Earth?" "Ah, yes, my lord," the officer confirmed. "Shall we recall it?" The warlord hesitated. He wanted to leave. He wanted to erase this world from his mind, to never speak of this battle again. But something inside him, a cold, unfamiliar instinct, stopped him. "No," the warlord said. "Leave it. I want to know if the beast stays asleep." The officer looked uncertain, but nodded. "Understood, my lord." The ship began to move. The engines hummed louder, preparing for the jump into deep space. But just as they prepared to leave, the warlord saw something on the planet's surface. A small figure, standing on a ruined battlefield. The human. The warlord's breath hitched. The human was looking up at him, as if he knew the warlord was watching. And then, as the ship finally jumped into warp, the human raised his hand and waved. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human watched the alien fleet disappear into the void. He let out a slow exhale, shaking the dust from his torn jacket. Well, that was fun. Behind him, Titan-001 still loomed over the battlefield, its shifting form slowly retracting. Its shape grew smaller, the twisting void-like presence calming, as if it was going back to sleep. But it wasn't. The human could feel it. Titan-001 wasn't going back to sleep. Not yet. It had felt something. Something beyond Earth. The human looked up at the sky. A deep, unshakable feeling crawled into his mind. This warlord was just one conqueror. Just one species. But there were others. And now, they knew. The moment the warlord returned to his empire, the news would spread. The whispers of what he had seen would reach others. They would send more. They would try again. And next time, it wouldn't be just an invasion. It would be a war. Titan-001 let out a low, vibrating sound, as if it already knew what was coming. The human sighed. Yeah, I know." He turned toward the horizon, where storm clouds were forming. "We're gonna have company soon. A new threat awakens." The warlord sat upon his throne of iron and fire, his empire stretching out before him in a sea of warships and towering citadels. But for the first time in his long, merciless reign, he felt nothing but fear. His homeworld, a massive fortress planet at the heart of his empire, was alive with panic. Whispers of his defeat at Earth had spread like wildfire. His advisors, once loyal and unwavering, now spoke with uncertainty. His warriors, once unbreakable, now hesitated when they met his gaze. They had all seen the footage. They had all heard the screams. They had all watched, in real time, as their invincible fleet was torn apart by a single human and the impossible nightmare buried beneath their world. They had never feared before. But now they feared Earth. The warlord sat in the darkness of his grand hall, his claws tapping against his armrest. The sound echoed, sharp and rhythmic. He had returned home in shame. He had left hundreds of thousands of his warriors behind, their bodies scattered across a battlefield that never should have been lost. He should have destroyed the planet. He should have never let that human live. And yet, even now, he knew the truth. Destroying Earth would not have saved him. Because Titan-001 wasn't just a weapon. It was something older, something stronger, something waiting. And the humans, they weren't afraid of it. They had buried it. Not out of fear, but out of control. Because Titan 001 was just the beginning. The warlord exhaled slowly, his mind clouded with thoughts. He had sent spies, silent probes, to watch Earth from a distance. He had received reports. The creature had gone back into the abyss beneath the planet's crust. But it was not asleep. It was waiting. And something worse, something even Titan 001 feared, was waking up elsewhere. A sharp beep echoed through the chamber. A transmission. One of his highest generals appeared on the screen, his expression dark. "My lord, you must see this." The warlord straightened. The general stepped aside, revealing a holographic display of a distant star system. The warlord frowned. "What is this?" The general hesitated. "This is from one of our deep space listening stations." The hologram shifted. At first, the warlord saw nothing, just empty void, the cold expanse of space. But then, a signal appeared. A deep, pulsing wave of energy, far greater than anything his empire had ever encountered. It wasn't natural. It wasn't a star collapsing or a planetary disturbance. It was a call. A call to something ancient. Something old. The warlord's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "Where is this coming from?" The general swallowed. It originated from a dead world outside the mapped territories. The warlord's breath slowed. A dead world. The general stepped closer to the display. Our probes confirmed movement beneath the surface. A hologram zoomed in on the barren, lifeless planet. Until, at its core, something shifted. Something huge. The sensors, struggling to process it, flickered with incomplete readings. It was a shadow, moving beneath the surface of an abandoned world. And then, a voice. Not words, not language. Something deeper. A presence. A pulse. A message carried through the void. A single, terrifying phrase. "I have waited long enough." The warlord stood abruptly. His heart pounded. The transmission cut off. Silence. The general took a slow breath. "My lord, that message was received across multiple empires. It was not just for us. Others heard it." The warlord's vision darkened. Other empires. Other rulers. Others like him. And then it hit him. Earth wasn't the only place where something had been buried. This thing, whatever it was, had been waiting. And now it was awake. The warlord sat down slowly. His empire had already suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of humanity. His power had been shattered. His people were questioning his rule. And now something else, something stronger than even Titan 001, was rising. And worst of all, it wasn't alone. He clenched his jaw. They had thought humanity was the biggest problem. They were wrong. The real war was only just beginning. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human sat on the edge of a rooftop, staring at the sky. The sun had set, and the stars above were unusually bright. He held a small device in his hands, a communication scanner picking up deep space signals. A single word flashed across the screen. "I have waited long enough." He exhaled sharply. Well, that's not good. Behind him, Titan 001 shifted slightly, its massive form lurking beneath the earth, resting but not asleep. It had felt it too. The human stared at the night sky, watching as tiny pinpricks of light, alien ships, moved silently in orbit. They all heard it, he muttered. They were watching, waiting, trying to decide if they should run or fight. A soft, amused voice interrupted his thoughts. "So, what's the plan?" He turned. Another human, dressed in military fatigues, stood behind him, arms crossed. A leader of Earth's defense forces. He grinned. "Plan. Same as always." The leader raised a brow. "And that is?" The human shrugged. "Wait for them to come." He tossed the scanner onto the ledge and stood up, stretching. "And when they do?" The grin widened. We show them why humans don't fear monsters. Behind them, Titan 001 let out a low, deep sound. Something distant answered back. The human's smile faded. The real fight was coming. And this time, it wasn't just Earth that was in danger. It was the entire universe.